The blood dripping from her split lip had long since dried by the time she stopped trying to remember what it felt like to hope. Fiona Prescott sat on the dusty floor of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Wood River, Nebraska, her back pressed against the rough wooden wall, her ribs screaming with every shallow breath she managed to draw. The year was 1878, and she had learned in the past 3 months that survival sometimes meant surrendering, that fighting only made the beatings last longer, that silence was the only mercy she could afford herself. The afternoon sun slanted through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the floor where she waited for whatever came next, her green eyes empty of everything except exhaustion. She did not hear the footsteps on the stairs at first. The saloon was never truly quiet, even in the dead hours between the lunch crowd and the evening rush when men came to drink away their wages and their sorrows. There was always the creak of floorboards above where the girls worked, always the distant murmur of voices from the back room where card games never seemed to end, always the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like a drum calling her toward some inevitable darkness. But then the door crashed open with such force that it rattled the bottles behind the bar, and Fiona flinched despite herself, her body responding to violence even when her mind had gone numb to it. She did not look up. Looking up meant meeting eyes, and meeting eyes meant inviting attention, and attention from men in this place meant pain. She had learned that lesson thoroughly. "Where is he?" The voice that filled the saloon was deep and rough as gravel, carrying an edge that made even the piano player in the corner stop mid-note. "Where is Samuel Cordell?" Fiona's fingers touched against the worn fabric of her dress, the once blue cotton now faded to something between gray and memory. Samuel Cordell, the man who owned her contract, who had bought her papers when she had been desperate enough to believe that working in a saloon was better than starving on the streets of Omaha after her father died and left her with nothing but debts. The man who had smiled when he promised her honest work serving drinks and keeping the books. The man whose smile had disappeared the moment they crossed the Nebraska border, and he told her exactly what kind of work she would really be doing. I asked a question. The voice came closer, and Fiona heard the distinct jingle of spurs, the heavy tread of boots that had walked through more than just Nebraska dust. Somebody better start talking before I lose what little patience I rode in here with. Now hold on just a minute. That was Frank, the bartender, his voice high and nervous. "You cannot just storm in here making demands. Mr. Cordell is a respected businessman in this town, and he does not take kindly to being threatened." Respected. The word was coated in contempt, so thick it could have been scraped off with a knife. That what you call a man who beats women half to death and forces them into work they never agreed to. That your definition of respect in Wood River. Fiona's head jerked up before she could stop herself, and for the first time in weeks, something flickered in her chest that might have once been hope. She saw him then, standing in the doorway with the afternoon light behind him turning his silhouette into something almost otherworldly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown coat over a dark vest, a gun belt slung low on his hips with the ease of a man who knew exactly how to use what he carried. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of fury barely contained. "I don't know what lies you've been listening to," Frank said, though his voice shook slightly, "but I think you better leave before there's trouble." "There's already trouble." The stranger took 3 steps into the saloon, his spurs chiming with each movement. "The only question is how much worse it gets before I get what I came for." He stopped then, his gaze sweeping the room, and Fiona felt the moment his eyes found her huddled against the wall. Something changed in his posture. A shift so subtle most people would have missed it, but she had spent 3 months learning to read the smallest changes in men's bodies, learning to anticipate violence before it arrived. This shift was different, though. This was not the coiling of a snake preparing to strike. This was recognition and rage and something else she could not quite name: Jesus Christ. The words were soft, almost reverent in their horror. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and dropped to one knee in front of her, and Fiona scrambled backward before she could think, her shoulder blades hitting the wall with a thud that made her gasp. "Easy," he said, and his voice had changed completely, gone soft and careful as if he were gentling a spooked horse. "I am not going to hurt you. My name is William Oakley, and I am here to get you out. William Oakley." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it, like a promise instead of just an introduction, made something crack in the careful numbness she had built around herself. You cannot just take her. Frank had found some courage, probably from the shotgun Fiona knew he kept under the bar. "She is under contract to Mr. Cordell. Legal and binding. You take her, that is theft." William stood up slowly, turning to face the bartender, and Fiona saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a winter storm. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, white against sun-bronzed skin, and another along his jaw that disappeared into the shadow of stubble. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were blazing with an anger so pure and righteous it seemed to fill the entire room. "Contract," William repeated flatly. "That what you call papers signed under false pretenses. Papers that promised honest work and delivered slavery." "That is a serious accusation," Frank said, but he was backing up now, his hand inching toward that shotgun. "I would not." William's hand hovered over his gun, not touching it, not threatening exactly, but the promise was clear as daybreak. "I am not in a mood to be patient about this." "What do you want?" Fiona's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rusty from disuse. She had stopped talking weeks ago, stopped trying to explain or beg or reason. But something about this man, this William Oakley with his fury and his promises, made her want to try again. He looked back at her and his expression softened around the edges. "To get you somewhere safe. To make sure Cordell never touches you again. To give you a choice about what happens next." He paused. "Your father was Jacob Prescott, was he not? From Omaha." She nodded, confusion joining the tiny spark of hope in her chest. "He and my father were friends, years back. Did business together before my family moved west to Wyoming. When I heard what happened after Jacob died, when I heard that his daughter had fallen into Cordell's hands." He shook his head. "I came as soon as I could, I just wish it had been sooner." "You came for me." The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign and impossible. Nobody came. Nobody cared. That was the lesson she had learned thoroughly in 21 years of living. "I came for you," he confirmed. "And I am not leaving without you." The door at the back of the saloon slammed open, and Samuel Cordell strode through like a king entering his throne room. He was a handsome man if you did not look too closely, well dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most families in Wood River made in 6 months. But Fiona had learned to look closely, had learned that handsome faces could hide rot and cruelty, that expensive clothes did not make a man decent. "William Oakley," Cordell said, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "I heard you were asking after me. I must say I am surprised. Your father and I never did business together. I did not think our paths would cross." "They would not have," William said, his voice gone cold and level, "if you were any kind of decent man. But you are not, are you, Samuel? You are the kind of filth who preys on desperate women." The kind who deals in human misery and calls it business. Cordell's smile did not waver, but something ugly flickered in his eyes. Strong words. I assume this is about Miss Prescott. I can assure you everything was done legally. She signed her contract willingly. She signed a contract for bookkeeping and serving drinks, William said. Not for what you have been forcing her to do. I force nothing, Cordell said mildly. The girls who work here understand the nature of the business. If Miss Prescott found the work disagreeable, she was welcome to buy out her contract at any time, for a sum you knew she could never pay. William took a step toward Cordell, and Fiona saw the saloon owner's hand drift toward his coat pocket. That is called entrapment, Samuel. That is called slavery, and I am here to end it. Noble of you, Cordell said. But unless you are prepared to pay her debt in full, I am afraid your visit here is pointless. She owes me $300 for transport, room, and board. Until that is settled, she stays. $300 for 3 months of hell, William said. That is what you are calling it. That is what the contract says. William was silent for a long moment, and Fiona could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the war between fury and pragmatism. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, counted out bills with deliberate precision, and threw them on the nearest table. $400, he said. That covers her debt and damages. Now tear up that contract. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. $400. She had never seen that much money in her life, certainly never imagined anyone would pay it for her freedom. She stared at William Oakley as if he had just worked a miracle in front of her eyes. Cordell picked up the money slowly, fanning through it with practiced fingers. His expression was unreadable. This is highly irregular. Irregular, William repeated. That is a funny word for it. How about we call it justice instead? Now get the contract. For a moment, Fiona thought Cordell would refuse. She could see the anger in the tight line of his mouth, the calculation in his eyes as he weighed whether $400 was worth letting her go. But then he must have seen something in William's face, some promise of violence that even Cordell's arrogance could not ignore, because he gestured to Frank. Get her papers from the safe. Frank scurried to obey, disappearing into the back office and returning moments later with a document Fiona recognized even from across the room. She had signed it 3 months ago with a shaking hand, believing she was saving herself. Instead, she had sold herself into a nightmare. Cordell took the contract, made a show of examining it one more time, then tore it precisely in half. We are square, Oakley, but I want you both out of my establishment now. William turned back to Fiona, extending his hand. Can you walk? She nodded, though in truth she was not entirely sure. Her ribs hurt with every breath, and she knew her left ankle was swollen from where Cordell had kicked her that morning after she dropped a tray of glasses. But she would crawl out of this place on her hands and knees if she had to, anything to be free of it. She took William's hand, his palm warm and calloused and steady, and let him help her to her feet. The world swayed for a moment, gray spots dancing at the edges of her vision, but she locked her knees and held on. I have got you, William said quietly. Just stay with me. They made it 3 steps toward the door before Cordell spoke again. She has nothing, you know. No money, no prospects, no family. What exactly do you plan to do with her? William stopped but did not turn around. That is none of your concern. You gave up any claim to know about her life the moment you tore up that contract. I am just saying, Cordell continued, his voice taking on an oily quality Fiona recognized too well. She will be a burden on you. Damaged goods, if we are being honest. No man in his right mind would want her now. You have wasted your money on charity that will only cost you more in the long run. Fiona felt William's hand tighten on hers, felt the tremor of rage that ran through him. When he spoke, his voice was so low and dangerous it made her shiver. "If you ever speak about her that way again, if I ever hear that you have so much as thought her name, I will come back here, and I will not be nearly so civilized about our business. You understand me, Samuel?" Cordell said nothing, but Fiona saw the flash of fear cross his face before he mastered it. Good, she thought with savage satisfaction. Let him be afraid for once. They stepped out into the autumn afternoon, and Fiona gasped as if she had been underwater and finally broke the surface. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the Platte River that ran just south of town. She had not been outside in daylight in 6 weeks, not since the last time she tried to run and Cordell caught her before she made it 2 blocks. "Easy," William said again, that same gentle tone he had used inside. "We are going to my horse, and then we are going to get you somewhere safe where you can rest. Can you make it that far?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked slowly down the wooden sidewalk, passing stores and houses that Fiona had seen only through grimy windows. Wood River was not a large town, maybe 800 souls on a good day, built along the banks of the Wood River that gave it its name before flowing into the Platte. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant they all knew what went on at the Silver Dollar Saloon and had done precisely nothing to stop it. William's horse was tied in front of the general store, a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a white star on its forehead. The horse nickered softly as they approached, and William ran his free hand along its neck. "This is Sterling," he said. "He is gentler than he looks." "Do you think you can ride?" Fiona looked at the horse, then at the saddle that seemed impossibly high, then down at her own battered body. Everything hurt. The thought of climbing onto a horse made her want to weep, but staying in Wood River hurt worse. "I can try," she whispered. William studied her face for a moment, then shook his head. "Actually, I have a better idea. There is a boarding house 2 streets over run by a woman named Martha Hayes. She is decent, and she does not ask questions she does not need answers to. Let me get you settled there, let you rest for a day or 2, and then we can figure out what comes next. You are staying." The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she hated how desperate it sounded, how much like begging. His expression softened again, and he reached up to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made tears prick at her eyes. "I am not going anywhere, Fiona. I promise you that. I did not come all this way just to abandon you at the first boarding house." "Why?" She needed to understand, needed to make sense of this stranger who had walked into her nightmare and paid $400 like it was nothing. "Why did you really come?" "My father and yours were friends years ago. That cannot be enough reason." William was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting lightly against her hair. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something she could not quite identify. "Because I know what it is like to feel powerless," he said finally. "Because my sister died when I was 16. Died because a man like Cordell decided he could do whatever he wanted to her and nobody would stop him. Because I was too young and too weak to save her, and I have spent every day since then trying to make up for that failure." He met her eyes, and she saw old pain there, old rage that had never fully healed. "When I heard that Jacob Prescott's daughter was in trouble, I saw a chance to do what I could not do 10 years ago, to save someone, to make it right, even if only this once." Fiona felt tears slip down her cheeks, hot and stinging in the cuts on her face. She had cried so much in the past 3 months that she thought she had run dry, but apparently there were still tears left for kindness, for the stunning novelty of someone caring. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," William said firmly. "You do not owe anyone anything anymore, Fiona. That is what freedom means." Martha Hayes's boarding house was a neat two-story building painted white with green shutters, surrounded by a garden that was putting itself to bed for winter. Martha herself was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, and she took one look at Fiona and immediately ushered her inside without asking a single question about the bruises or the haunted look in her eyes. "I have a room on the ground floor," Martha said briskly. "Nice and quiet, with a window that faces the garden. You will have privacy, and I will bring meals to you until you feel ready to come to the dining room." William paid for 2 weeks in advance, and Martha nodded as if this was all perfectly normal, as if young women with split lips and dead eyes showed up on her doorstep every day. The room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a washstand with a china pitcher and basin, and a rocking chair by the window. Fiona stood in the doorway staring at it as if it might disappear if she blinked. "I will be back tomorrow morning," William said from behind her. "I am staying at the hotel across the street, so if you need anything at all, you can send for me. Martha knows where I am." "You are really staying," she said, still not quite believing it. "I am really staying." He hesitated, then added, "I know you have no reason to trust me, no reason to trust any man after what you have been through. But I mean what I said, Fiona. You are safe now, and I am going to make sure you stay that way." She turned to face him, this stranger who had become her savior in the space of an hour. "What happens after 2 weeks?" "That depends on what you want," William said. "I have a ranch in Wyoming, up in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. It is not fancy, but it is mine, and it is a long way from Samuel Cordell. You would be welcome there if you wanted to come. Or if you would rather stay here or go somewhere else entirely, I will help you do that too. Whatever you choose, you will have enough money to start over." "I do not understand why you are doing this," Fiona whispered. "I am nothing to you, just the daughter of a man your father once knew." William met her gaze steadily. "You are a person who deserves better than what life has handed you. That is reason enough." After he left, Fiona sat on the edge of the bed and tried to comprehend that she was really here, really free, really safe. It felt like a dream, fragile and impossible, the kind of thing she would wake from to find herself back on the floor of the Silver Dollar with Cordell's boot pressing into her ribs. But the bed was solid beneath her, and the quilt was soft under her fingers, and through the window she could see the last roses of autumn blooming in Martha's garden. Real. All of it was real. She lay back carefully, mindful of her injuries, and closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 months, she slept without fear. The next morning, Fiona woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. For a moment, she did not remember where she was, and panic seized her heart. Then memory returned, and with it the cautious hope that yesterday had not been a dream. Martha brought breakfast on a tray: eggs and bacon, fresh bread with butter and honey, coffee that tasted like heaven. Fiona ate slowly, her stomach protesting after months of scraps and stale food, but every bite felt like a small victory. "The young man was asking after you," Martha said as she collected the tray. "Mr. Oakley. He is waiting in the parlor if you feel up to seeing him." Fiona looked down at herself, at the same stained dress she had been wearing for weeks. "I do not have anything else to wear." Martha's eyes were kind. "I might have something that would fit you. Let me see what I can find." 20 minutes later, Fiona stood in front of the mirror in a simple brown dress that Martha had altered from her own wardrobe. It was plain but clean, and it fit well enough. She had washed her face and combed her hair, pulling it back into a braid that hung down her back. The bruises on her face were still visible, the split in her lip still healing, but she looked more like a person and less like a ghost. William stood up when she entered the parlor, his hat in his hands. He was cleaned up too, wearing a fresh shirt under his vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. He looked younger in the morning light, and Fiona realized with a start that he was probably not much older than her, maybe 25 or 26. "You look better," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got kicked by a horse," she admitted. "But better than yesterday," he gestured to the sofa. "Will you sit with me? I want to talk about what happens next, but only if you are ready." They sat, a careful distance between them, and Fiona folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She was not afraid of him exactly, but trust was a currency she had spent down to nothing. "I spoke to the sheriff this morning," William said. "He was not interested in pursuing any charges against Cordell. Of course not." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Cordell owns half this town, including the sheriff probably." "Probably," William agreed. "Which is why I think it would be better for you to leave Wood River sooner rather than later. Not because I am trying to rush you," he added quickly, "but because Cordell knows where you are and men like him do not like losing their property. I am not his property anymore. No, you are not. But that might not stop him from trying to take you back, especially if he thinks he can do it quietly." William leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "My ranch is 2 weeks' ride from here, up in Wyoming territory. It is isolated, which means it is safe. Nobody is going to bother you there. You would have your own space, your own room, and you would not have to work if you did not want to. You could just rest and heal." "And then what?" Fiona asked. "I cannot stay at your ranch forever, living on your charity." "It would not be charity," William said. "I could use the help, actually. The place has been falling apart since my housekeeper left to live with her daughter in Denver. I cannot cook worth a damn, and the house looks like a cattle shed most days. If you wanted to help with that, I would pay you fair wages. But only if you wanted to. No obligations, Fiona. I mean that." She studied his face, looking for the lie, for the trick, for the moment when the mask would slip, and she would see what he really wanted from her. But all she saw was earnestness, and that steady, burning anger that seemed to be his natural state when he thought about what had happened to her. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked again. "And do not tell me it is just because of my father or because of your sister. There has to be more to it." William was quiet for a long moment, and she watched emotions flicker across his face like clouds racing across the sun. "Finally," he said, "because I am tired of seeing powerful men hurt people who cannot fight back. Because I spent 10 years in the army watching officers abuse their authority, and then came home to find that the West is not any better. Because somebody has to stand up and say it is wrong, and I am tired of waiting for someone else to do it." "You were in the army," he nodded. "Enlisted when I was 17, right after my sister died. Served under General Crook in the Apache campaigns. Got promoted to sergeant before I figured out that I was better at fighting than following orders. Mustered out 2 years ago and used my savings to buy the ranch." He smiled slightly. "Turns out I am not much better at ranching than I was at following orders, but at least the cattle do not shoot back." Despite everything, Fiona felt a smile tug at her lips. "That does sound like an improvement." "You smiled," William said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "I was starting to think you did not know how." The smile faded. "I forgot how for a while." "I am going to help you remember," he said, "if you will let me." They left Wood River 3 days later, early in the morning when the mist still hung over the river and most of the town was still asleep. William had bought a gentle mare for Fiona to ride, a pretty chestnut with a patient temperament, and he had loaded a pack horse with supplies for the journey. Martha had packed food for them, and she hugged Fiona goodbye with tears in her eyes. "You take care of yourself," Martha whispered. "And do not let anyone make you feel small ever again." Fiona rode out of Wood River without looking back, without allowing herself even one glance at the silver-dollar saloon. That part of her life was over. Whatever came next had to be better, because nothing could be worse. The journey to Wyoming took 12 days instead of the anticipated 2 weeks. They rode north through Nebraska, following the Platte River, and then cutting northwest toward the Montana border. The weather held, cool and clear with the perfect snap of autumn in the air. At night, they camped under the stars, and William always made sure she had the warmest blanket and the spot closest to the fire. He talked during the long days of riding, telling her about the ranch and the land around it, about the Bighorn Mountains that rose like ancient guardians from the plains, about the creek that ran through his property, and the stand of cottonwoods where eagles nested every spring. He talked about his plans to expand the herd, about the barn that needed a new roof before winter, about his neighbors who were few and far between but decent folk when you needed them. Fiona listened and said little at first, her voice still rusty from months of silence. But slowly, as the miles fell away behind them and Samuel Cordell became more memory than threat, she began to talk too. Small things at first, comments about the landscape, questions about Wyoming, observations about the weather. Then, gradually, bigger things. Stories about her father, about growing up in Omaha when it was still rough and new, about her mother who had died when Fiona was 12 and left her to manage a household and a grief-stricken father who never quite recovered. "He was a good man," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "But he was not a practical one. He trusted people too easily, loaned money to friends who never paid him back, invested in schemes that sounded good but never panned out. When he died, I found out that we had been living on credit for years. Everything we owned was mortgaged or owed. I had nothing except the clothes on my back and his pocket watch." She pulled the watch from her pocket, a tarnished silver piece that she had managed to keep hidden from Cordell through sheer stubbornness. "This is all I have left of him." William took the watch carefully, examining it in the firelight. "Jacob Prescott," he read from the inscription on the back. "From Kathleen, with love eternal. That was your mother." "Yes." Fiona felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that never quite went away when she thought of her parents. They were so in love. Even after she died, he never looked at another woman. He said she was the only one for him, and he would wait to see her again in heaven. William handed the watch back gently. "That is a rare thing, that kind of love." "Do you believe in it?" Fiona asked. "In love like that, I mean, the kind that lasts forever." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "I want to. I have seen enough ugliness in the world that I have to believe there is beauty somewhere to balance it out. Love that lasts forever seems like the kind of beauty worth believing in." "Have you ever been in love?" The question surprised her as soon as she asked it, too personal and too bold. But William did not seem offended. "No," he said simply. "I have been too busy to think much about it. The Army does not leave much room for romance, and since I bought the ranch, I have been too focused on keeping the place running to look for anything else." He glanced at her, and in the firelight his eyes were soft. "What about you?" "No," Fiona said. "There was a boy when I was 17, but my father did not approve, and then Mother died and I had to take care of things at home. After that, there was never time, and then Father died, and then—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence, not wanting to speak Samuel Cordell's name into this peaceful night. "Then you survived," William said firmly. "That is what happened then. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you are still here, and you are still standing. That takes more strength than you probably realize, Fiona." She looked at him across the fire, this man who had saved her, who was taking her to a safe place, who spoke to her like she mattered. Something in her chest shifted, a crack in the armor she had built around her heart. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first tender shoot of something that might grow into trust, given enough time and care. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for coming for me, for getting me out for this." She gestured at the camp, at the open sky above them, at the freedom of being able to sit by a fire without fear. "I do not think I will ever be able to repay you." "You do not have to repay kindness, Fiona," William said. "That is not how it works. You just accept it, and then someday, when you are ready, you pass it along to someone else who needs it." They reached the ranch on a Wednesday afternoon when the sun was high and bright. Fiona saw it from a ridge above the valley, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled against the foothills with the Bighorn Mountains rising behind them like a wall against the sky. There was a house, small but solid-looking, built from logs with a stone chimney at one end. A barn, larger than the house with corrals spreading out around it. A few smaller outbuildings that might have been a smokehouse, a chicken coop and storage sheds. "Home," William said, and there was pride in his voice and relief, and something else she could not quite name. "Welcome to the Oakley Ranch." They rode down into the valley, and Fiona saw that the place was both better and worse than she had imagined. The buildings were solid and well-maintained, but there was a definite bachelor quality to everything, a sense that function mattered more than form. The corrals needed mending in places, the garden had gone wild with weeds, and there were tools scattered around the yard that should have been put away weeks ago. But it was beautiful too, in a wild, honest way. The creek William had mentioned ran clear and cold through the north end of the property, lined with cottonwoods that were turning gold with autumn. Mountains rose in every direction, pine-covered and ancient, and the sky seemed bigger here than anywhere Fiona had ever been. William helped her down from her horse, his hands gentle on her waist, and for the first time since he touched her, she did not flinch. "Let me show you the house," he said. Inside was one large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a fireplace dominating one wall and a cast iron stove in the corner. There were 2 doors leading to bedrooms, both smaller than the main room but private and comfortable looking. William had clearly made an effort to clean before he left, but there was still dust on the furniture and dishes in the sink that needed washing. "It is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is dry and warm, and the roof does not leak much except during heavy rains." "It is wonderful," Fiona said, and meant it. Compared to the tiny room at the Silver Dollar Saloon where she had lived with 3 other girls, this place was a palace. "Which room is mine?" William pointed to the left door. "That one. It has the better window and it is farther from the front door, so it is quieter. I put fresh sheets on the bed before I left, but I will understand if you want to change them anyway." Fiona walked to the door and pushed it open. The room was small but perfect, with a real bed covered in a simple quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. The window looked out toward the mountains, framing them like a painting. "It is perfect," she said, turning back to him. "William, it is absolutely perfect." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less burdened. "I am glad you like it. Take some time to settle in and I will get supper started. Fair warning, though, I meant what I said about not being able to cook. We will probably have to survive on beans and bacon until you are ready to take over the kitchen." Despite herself, Fiona laughed. It was a small sound, rusty and uncertain, but it was real. "I can manage better than beans and bacon. Just let me rest for a few minutes, and I will see what you have in the pantry." That first night at the ranch set the pattern for the weeks that followed. William was unfailingly courteous, giving her space and privacy, never pushing, never asking for more than she was ready to give. He left early each morning to work with the cattle or mend fences or handle the 100 other tasks that came with running a ranch. Fiona spent her days putting the house in order, cooking meals that were more than just survival food, and slowly learning to live without fear. It was not easy. She woke screaming from nightmares more nights than not, and there were moments when a sudden noise or movement would send her scrambling for a corner, her heart racing, her mind back in that saloon. But William was patient. He never touched her without warning, never raised his voice, never made her feel weak or broken for the ways that trauma still lived in her body. "It gets better," he told her one morning after she apologized for waking him with her screaming. "Not all at once and not in a straight line, but it does get better, I promise." "How do you know?" she asked. "Because I had nightmares for 3 years after I came home from Arizona," he said quietly. "I saw things in that war, did things that I am not proud of. For a long time, I thought I would never sleep through the night again. But eventually, the good nights started outnumbering the bad ones. You just have to give yourself time." As autumn deepened into winter, Fiona found herself settling into the rhythms of ranch life with an ease that surprised her. She had never lived anywhere so isolated, never known quiet like this, and she discovered that she loved it. There was something healing about the silence, about the vast expanse of sky and land that made her feel both small and significant at once. She also found herself noticing William in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude. The way he moved, economical and graceful despite his size. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he was doing more often now. The way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, off-key and cheerful. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression she was starting to recognize as longing. She should not feel anything for him beyond gratitude, she told herself sternly. He had saved her, yes, but that did not mean anything romantic had to follow. He was being kind, that was all. He had said so himself, said he was just trying to right an old wrong, trying to save someone the way he could not save his sister. But her heart was not listening to logic. Her heart noticed the gentleness in his hands when he helped her carry water from the creek. Her heart noticed the way he always made sure she had the warmest spot by the fire. Her heart noticed that he had not once, not even in passing, suggested that she owed him anything for her rescue or her place at his ranch. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that turned the valley into something from a fairy tale. Fiona stood at the window watching it fall and felt William come up behind her. "Pretty, is it not?" he said softly. "It is beautiful." She turned to look at him and found him closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the green flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I have never seen snow like this before. In Omaha, it was always dirty by the time it hit the ground. Out here it stays clean," William said, "at least until the cattle trample it into mud." He hesitated, then added, "Are you happy here, Fiona, really happy? Because if you are not, if you want to go somewhere else, I will help you do that. I do not want you to feel trapped." "I do not feel trapped," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I feel free. For the first time in my life, maybe ever, I feel like I can breathe." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of his lips as if he wanted to say something important but was not sure how. Finally, he just nodded and stepped back, putting a careful distance between them again. "Good," he said. "That is good." But Fiona found herself wishing he had stayed close, wishing he had said whatever it was he had been thinking. The thought scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. Winter settled over the Bighorn Mountains with serious intent by mid-November. The snow that had been picturesque at first became a daily reality that had to be managed. William taught Fiona how to keep the paths clear between the house and the barn, how to break ice on the water troughs, how to watch the sky for signs of serious storms. She learned quickly, driven by a need to be useful, to prove that she was not just a burden he had taken on out of misplaced obligation. They fell into a comfortable routine, working together during the day and spending evenings by the fire. William would read aloud from the books he owned, mostly westerns and histories, but also a few volumes of poetry that surprised her, while Fiona mended clothes or knitted socks from wool she had found in a trunk in her room. It was domestic and peaceful, and she caught herself thinking more than once that this was what a marriage might feel like if you were lucky enough to marry someone you could talk to. The thought made her blush and look away, but it kept coming back. One evening in late November, after an early supper of venison stew and biscuits, William built up the fire against the cold and settled into his usual chair with a book. But instead of opening it, he just sat there, staring into the flames with an expression Fiona could not quite read. "What is wrong?" she asked, setting down her knitting. He looked up, startled. "Nothing is wrong. Why do you ask?" "Because you have been staring at that book for 5 minutes without opening it, and you look like you are trying to solve a complicated problem." William smiled slightly. "I did not realize I was so easy to read." "You are not, usually," Fiona said, "but I have been watching you long enough to know when something is on your mind." He was quiet for a moment, then set the book aside. "I was thinking about Christmas." "Christmas? It is next month," he said. "I was wondering if you would want to do something to mark it. Nothing fancy, just maybe a decent meal, a few decorations. Something to acknowledge that the day is special." Fiona felt her throat tighten. She had not celebrated Christmas properly since her mother died. Her father had tried the first few years, but his heart was never in it, and by the time Fiona was 17, they had stopped pretending. And last Christmas, she had been in Omaha, alone and desperate, trying to figure out how to survive after her father's funeral. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like it very much." William's face lit up. "Good. We can cut a tree from the property, and I have some decorations packed away that belong to my mother, nothing fancy but nice enough. And I will ride into town for supplies so we can make a proper feast." "Town?" Fiona felt a flicker of anxiety. "How far is the nearest town?" "Buffalo, about 15 miles south. It is small, but they have a general store and a church and a few other businesses. I go once a month or so for supplies." He must have seen something in her face because he added quickly, "You do not have to come if you do not want to. I know being around people might be difficult right now." "It is not that," Fiona said, though it was partly that. "I just do not want to cause any trouble for you. People might talk, seeing you with a woman living at your ranch." William's expression hardened slightly. "Let them talk. Anyone who has a problem with me helping someone in need can answer to me directly. Besides, most folks in Buffalo are decent. They mind their own business and expect you to do the same." "Still," Fiona said, "I would not want to damage your reputation." "My reputation will survive," William said firmly. "And honestly, Fiona, I do not give a damn what people think. You are here because you deserve a safe place to heal, and anyone who suggests otherwise can go to hell." The fierceness in his voice made her heart skip. She had seen him angry before, had seen the fury that lived in him when he thought about injustice. But this was different. This was personal. This was about her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not have to thank me," he said, his voice softening. "Not for this, not for anything. I want you here, Fiona, not because I need a housekeeper or because I feel obligated, but because I like having you here. Because this place feels more like a home with you in it than it ever did when I was alone." Fiona's breath caught. She stared at him across the space between them, trying to read the expression on his face, trying to understand what he was really saying. "William," she started, but he held up a hand. "I am not saying this to pressure you," he said quickly. "I know you have been through hell, and I know the last thing you need is another man making demands or having expectations. I just wanted you to know that you are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I rescued, just as yourself." Something in Fiona's chest cracked open, a fissure in the walls she had built around her heart. She stood up slowly, crossed the room to where he sat, and did something she had not done since he pulled her out of the silver-dollar saloon. She reached out and touched him deliberately, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. William froze, his whole body going still as if he was afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had allowed her to reach for him. "You have been so kind to me," Fiona said quietly. "Kinder than I knew people could be, and I want you to know that I am grateful, but it is more than that." She took a breath, trying to find words for feelings she was only beginning to understand. "I like being here too. I like the quiet and the mountains and the work, but mostly I like being here with you." William looked up at her, and his eyes were full of hope and fear, and something that might have been love if she let herself believe it. "Fiona," he said, his voice rough, "I need you to understand something. When I look at you, I do not see someone broken or damaged. I do not see someone I rescued. I see a woman who is strong and brave and who survived things that would have destroyed most people. I see someone I admire, someone I respect, someone I—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I am saying this badly." "You are saying it perfectly," Fiona whispered. She moved her hand from his shoulder to his face, cupping his jaw gently, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "I think I am falling in love with you, William Oakley. I did not mean to, and I am probably crazy for it, but I think it is happening anyway." For a moment, William just stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then, slowly, carefully, he stood up and took both her hands in his. "I am definitely falling in love with you," he said. "Have been since the moment I saw you in that saloon, and you looked at me like you had forgotten what hope felt like. I wanted to give it back to you. I wanted to give you everything." "You have," Fiona said, and then she was crying, tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, clean tears, tears that washed away months of pain and fear. "You have given me everything that matters." William pulled her close then, his arms coming around her in a hug that was gentle and fierce at once. Fiona pressed her face against his chest and let herself be held, let herself feel safe in a way she had never felt safe before. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and she matched her breathing to its rhythm. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, not needing words. When Fiona finally pulled back, William cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Only if you want me to. No pressure, no expectations." In answer, Fiona stretched up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative but real. William made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back carefully, as if she were precious and fragile and worth more than all the gold in California. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses that men at the saloon had tried to force on her. This was sweet and slow and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Fiona Prescott," he said. "And I will spend every day proving that you are safe with me, that your heart is safe with me." "I know it is," Fiona said. "I think I have known it for a while now. I was just afraid to believe it." "You never have to be afraid again," William promised. "Not with me, not ever." They spent the next few weeks in a state of tentative joy, learning what it meant to be in love without rushing toward anything. William continued to be respectful of Fiona's space and boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They held hands while they worked, kissed goodnight before going to their separate rooms, sat close by the fire in the evenings. It was chaste and sweet and exactly what Fiona needed. In early December, William rode into Buffalo for Christmas supplies and came back with arms full of packages and a grin on his face. "I may have gone a little overboard," he admitted, as he unloaded everything onto the kitchen table. "But the storekeeper asked what I was celebrating, and when I told him I had a lady friend staying at the ranch, he insisted I needed to do it right." Fiona laughed, sorting through tins of cookies, bags of peppermint sticks, a ham wrapped in brown paper, and a beautiful bolt of dark blue fabric that made her gasp. "William, this is too much." "Nonsense," he said. "I have been saving up for months with nothing to spend it on." "Let me spoil you a little. Besides, Martha at the dress shop said that fabric would look beautiful on you, and I happen to agree." "You talked to Martha at the dress shop about me?" Fiona felt her cheeks heat. "I might have mentioned that I wanted to buy something nice for someone special," William said, looking slightly embarrassed. She got enthusiastic. "Also, half the town now knows I am courting someone, so be prepared for that if you ever decide to come to Buffalo with me." "Courting," Fiona repeated, testing the word. "Is that what we are doing?" William turned to face her fully, suddenly serious. "Yes, at least I hope that is what we are doing, unless you would rather call it something else." Fiona walked over to him and took his hands. "Courting is good. Courting is what people do when they are thinking about building a future together, right?" "Right," William said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then that is what we are doing," Fiona said, "because I cannot imagine a future without you in it anymore." They cut down a pine tree the week before Christmas, a small but perfectly shaped evergreen that fit nicely in the corner by the window. William brought out his mother's decorations, delicate glass ornaments that caught the firelight, strings of cranberries that they made together while singing carols badly, paper stars that Fiona folded from old newspapers. When they finally stood back to admire their work, the little tree glowed with warmth and memory. "It is perfect," Fiona said, slipping her hand into William's. "You are perfect," he replied and kissed the top of her head. Christmas Day dawned cold and clear, with fresh snow sparkling in the early light. Fiona woke to the smell of coffee and found William already up, building up the fire and looking pleased with himself. "Merry Christmas," he said when she emerged from her room wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "Merry Christmas," she replied, smiling. "What has you looking so happy?" "I have something for you," he said. "Well, several somethings actually. But one in particular I have been waiting to give you." He pulled a small wrapped package from behind the woodbox, clearly nervous as he handed it to her. Fiona unwrapped it carefully and found herself holding a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of mountains and stars. "Open it," William urged. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a ring. Not an expensive ring, not gold or set with precious stones, but a simple silver band with a tiny turquoise stone set in the center. It was the most beautiful thing Fiona had ever seen. "William," she breathed. "I am not asking you to marry me right now," he said quickly. "I know it is too soon and I know you need more time, but I wanted you to have this, to know that I am serious about you, about us. Whenever you are ready, whenever you feel safe enough to say yes, I will be here, waiting, hoping, loving you." Fiona looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "What if I am ready now?" William froze. "What? What if I am ready now?" she repeated. "What if I do not want to wait? What if I want to start building that future right away?" "Fiona, you do not have to rush this because you think it is what I want," William said, though hope was written plainly across his face. "Take all the time you need. "I am not rushing because of you," Fiona said firmly. "I am choosing this because for the first time in my life I get to choose. Nobody is forcing me. Nobody is tricking me. Nobody has power over me. I get to decide what my life looks like, and I choose you, William. I choose this life we have been building. I choose love and safety and a home in the mountains with a man who looks at me like I matter." William's face crumpled and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You matter more than anything," he said fiercely. "You are everything, Fiona. Everything good in my life starts and ends with you." "So, is that a yes?" Fiona asked, laughing through her tears. "Will you marry me, William Oakley?" "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "God, yes. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and then he kissed her properly, deeply, with all the love and passion and promise he had been holding back. Fiona kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all her hope and trust and newly discovered joy. They were married 3 weeks later in Buffalo by the circuit preacher who came through once a month. It was a small ceremony, just them and the preacher and Martha from the dress shop, who served as witness and cried happy tears through the whole thing. Fiona wore a dress made from the blue fabric William had bought, sewn by her own hands, and carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers that William had pressed for her back in autumn. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, William kissed her in front of God and everyone, and Fiona felt something shift in her soul, something wounded beginning finally to heal. The ride back to the ranch, their ranch now, their home together, was cold but beautiful, with snow falling gently from a slate-gray sky. William kept looking over at her and grinning like a fool, and Fiona could not stop smiling back. "I cannot believe you are my wife," he said for probably the 10th time. "I cannot believe I am anyone's wife," Fiona replied. "6 months ago I thought my life was over. I thought I would die in that saloon, forgotten and alone. And now here I am, married to a good man, living in the most beautiful place I have ever seen." "Here we are," William agreed, "both of us getting a second chance." That night, in the privacy of their home, with the fire burning low and the snow falling outside, they came together as husband and wife. William was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Fiona felt safe and loved every moment. It was nothing like the violence and degradation she had experienced before. This was tenderness and passion, and the sweet discovery of what it meant to give yourself to someone who would treasure the gift. Afterward, lying in William's arms in the bed that was now theirs, Fiona felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," William replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." The winter passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Fiona threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, sewing curtains and tablecloths, cooking meals that made William groan with pleasure, organizing every corner until the place gleamed. William worked the ranch with new energy, making plans for spring, talking about expanding the herd and building a bigger barn. They were happy in a way that felt miraculous to both of them, like they had been given something precious and improbable. Some nights, Fiona still woke from nightmares, but now William was there to hold her and remind her that she was safe. Some days, William would get that distant look in his eyes that meant he was remembering the war, but Fiona learned to pull him back with a touch and a soft word. They healed each other, slowly and surely. Two broken people building something whole. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing wildflowers to the meadows around the ranch. Fiona discovered she was pregnant in April, and William cried when she told him, happy tears that he did not bother to hide. A baby, he kept saying, his hand pressed gently to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," William said. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and about a dozen other things I do not have words for. We are going to be parents, Fiona. We are going to have a family." Their daughter was born in late December, just after Christmas, as if she had been waiting to be the best gift of all. They named her Catherine Rose, after William's sister and Fiona's mother, and she came into the world screaming with healthy lungs and a full head of dark hair. William held his daughter for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is absolutely perfect." Fiona, exhausted but glowing, watched her husband fall in love with their child and felt her heart swell so large she thought it might burst. This was what happiness looked like. This was what safety felt like. This was the family she had thought she would never have. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, a son they named Jacob after Fiona's father, and another daughter they called Margaret after Martha from the boarding house, who had been so kind when Fiona needed kindness most. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the region. William hired help as they expanded, good men who treated Fiona with respect and never made her feel afraid in her own home. They traveled sometimes, taking the children to see the wonders of the growing West Yellowstone with its geysers and hot springs, Denver with its grand hotels and theaters, San Francisco with its ocean views and cable cars. But they always came home to the ranch, to the mountains and the creek, and the house where their love had first taken root. Fiona never forgot where she came from or what she had survived. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, she would tell William about the girls she had left behind at the Silver Dollar Saloon, wondering what had become of them. "I wish I could have saved them too," William would say. "You saved who you could save," Fiona would reply. "And you gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," William would say and kiss her gently. When they had been married 20 years, William took Fiona back to Wood River. She had not wanted to go, but he insisted they needed to face the past properly, to show themselves that it had no power over them anymore. The town had changed. The Silver Dollar Saloon was gone, burned down in a fire 10 years earlier. Samuel Cordell had died in that fire, some said drunk and alone, unable to escape the building he had ruled like a petty tyrant. The boarding house where Martha Hayes had given Fiona sanctuary was still standing, though Martha herself had passed away the previous winter. But her daughter ran it now, and she remembered the young woman and the angry cowboy who had changed each other's lives. They did not stay long in Wood River. There was nothing there for them except ghosts and old pain. But as they rode away, heading back toward Wyoming and home, Fiona felt something lift from her shoulders, a burden she had carried without realizing it. "I am free," she said to William as they crossed the Nebraska border. "Really, truly free." "You have been free since the day I walked into that saloon," William said. "No," Fiona corrected gently. "I stopped being a captive that day, but I did not become free until I learned to trust again, to love again, to believe that I deserved good things. That took years, William. That took you and our children and this life we built. That is what freedom really means." William reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then I am glad I got to be part of your journey to it." "You were not part of it," Fiona said. "You were everything." They grew old together in the house by the mountains. Their children grew up strong and capable, inheriting their father's sense of justice and their mother's resilience. Catherine became a teacher, running a school for ranch children in Buffalo. Jacob took over the ranch, managing it with the same care his father had shown. Margaret became a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Wyoming, driven by her mother's stories of surviving against impossible odds. Fiona and William watched their grandchildren come into the world, and then their great-grandchildren, each generation carrying forward the legacy of love and strength that had started in a saloon in Nebraska, when a broken woman stopped fighting and a furious cowboy walked in ready to fight for both of them. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by family and friends, William stood up to make a toast. He was 76 now, his hair white and his movements slower, but his eyes were still the same storm gray that Fiona had fallen in love with decades before. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong, I walked into a saloon in Wood River looking for a chance to make things right. What I found was the love of my life, the mother of my children, the woman who taught me that strength is not about how hard you can fight, but about how you survive when fighting is no longer an option. He looked at Fiona, and his eyes were bright with tears. You gave me everything, Fiona Oakley. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me better than I ever thought I could be, and I promise you I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Fiona stood up and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers the way she had done so many times over the years. And I will love you the same way, she said. You saved me, William, not just from that saloon, but from believing I was not worth saving. You showed me what love really means, what partnership really looks like. Everything good in my life flows from the day you walked in with all that righteous fury and refused to leave me behind. They kissed then, while their family cheered and clapped and cried happy tears. It was sweet and gentle and full of 50 years of love and partnership, and choosing each other every single day. William Oakley died in his sleep 5 years later, on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the creek was running high with snowmelt. Fiona held his hand as he slipped away peacefully, whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again someday, that he had been the best part of her life. She lived 3 more years after that, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all knew the story of how their grandfather had saved their grandmother, and how their love had built everything that came after. When Fiona passed away quietly one winter evening, her daughter Catherine found her with a smile on her face and William's ring still on her finger after 58 years of marriage. They buried her next to William in the small cemetery on the hill above the ranch, looking out toward the Bighorn Mountains they had both loved so much. On the shared headstone, their children had carved a simple inscription, "Here lie William and Fiona Oakley." He fought for her when she could not fight for herself. Together, they built a love that conquered all. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through Jacob's line and then to his children and grandchildren. The house was expanded and updated, but the original rooms remained, preserved as they had been when William and Fiona lived there. The bedroom where their love had first become real, the kitchen where Fiona had cooked thousands of meals, the living room where they had sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing while building a life together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the snow was falling and the wind whispered through the pines, people swore they could feel the presence of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other through every trial. The woman who had survived hell and the man who had been furious enough for both of them, who had walked into her darkness and refused to let it consume her. Their love story became legend in Wyoming, told and retold over the years until it took on the quality of myth. But those who knew the real story, who understood the pain and healing and hard work that had gone into building that love, knew it was so much better than myth. It was real. It was earned. It was the kind of love that changes everything, that redeems the past and builds the future, that proves that even in the darkest moments, hope can walk through the door in scuffed boots and a dusty coat, ready to fight every battle until you remember how to fight your own. That was the legacy of Fiona and William Oakley. Not just the land or the money or the descendants who carried their names into the future, but the proof that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that fury in the service of justice is a righteous thing, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is show up for someone when they have stopped being able to show up for themselves. Their story ended the way all good love stories should, not with tragedy or separation, but with two people who chose each other every day until there were no more days to choose. They lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy of strength and compassion that rippled out through generations. And in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything.